The plan here is just to provide a couple of quick videos that basically offer some strategies for improving your responses to question 1 in the history extension exam. These shouldn't be read really as like a kind of a algorithm or something to get a band 6 or above 90 in your responses. The basic point is to try and make sure and clarify that you understand what it takes to actually achieve at a higher level in this course, because it is very complicated. So this is not a golden ticket to a 45 or above out of 50. This is just some basic strategies I think that you can start to think through to start to improve, maybe make gains by 1 or 2 marks in each of the essays that you write. The first strategy that I'm going to quickly discuss is probably a very logical place to start, and that is thinking about how you actually approach the source in question 1. If you remember, in question 1 you're generally given a small slab of text, so say something like 300 to 500 words, or at least that's been the case in the past, and you've been asked to engage with it critically using your own sources. And remember, you're asked to read that source in relation to a specific question as well. So a couple of things that I think we can point out with this to make sure that you're actually using the source in a more intelligent and more sophisticated manner is perhaps to think about 2 ways of approaching the source. One is pretty general, and that is that you refer to the source. Okay, so your strategy for approaching the source is that you're planning to refer to it. And that's pretty obvious, but it's actually where a lot of people stay. And they don't actually take their engagement with the source beyond really referring to it, and then basically dragging quickly in all of the stuff that they've brought in from their own preparation and discuss that in greater detail. Okay, so frame or approach 1 would be to basically just prepare for this part of the exam by thinking that when you get the source, you will refer to it. Now, that's not terrible because you have to refer to the source. But I think a better way of approaching the source in question 1 might be to think about and preparing to critically engage with it. Okay, so obviously you can sense that that's a far more kind of, in a sense, intelligent and sophisticated kind of thing to do if you're critically engaging with something rather than just referring to it. Referring to something, it really means that you've understood it and you can identify relevant parts of it, sure, but it doesn't really do anything beyond that. Critically engaging with it basically assumes that you can understand it and do all these things as well, but you're taking it beyond that a little bit in this approach. So what might it mean to refer to a source and take this approach to it in the exam? Well, firstly, you're going to have some regular references to the source. That's proof that you're referring to the source. You say things like, as source A argues, or as the author, whatever their name is, argues in the source, and so on and so on. You might quote a bit of it, or you might paraphrase a part of it, and you do that several times throughout the essay. You might even do that every paragraph. Now, that's evidence that you've referred to the source that you've been given, sure. You might also, in this case, even develop some relevant points for discussion from the source. So in referring to it, you're noticing that it makes a claim perhaps about, say, the truth of history, or about academic and popular history or something like that, and you can see that claim and you develop a discussion about that issue based upon your observations of what's in the source. Now, that's all useful and that's all good, but if that's all you do, it's hard to really develop a sophisticated response. And if you also think about it, it's hard for the marker to see that you're really a cut above the other students, because a lot of people will be doing this. A lot of people will be making reference to the source, and a lot of people will be discussing some issues from it. So to set yourself apart and to, in a sense, demonstrate that you really understand what's going on, you want to be able to develop a sophisticated and critical discussion of the source that does this, certainly, but also does other things. So then what might it be to critically engage with the source? Well, I firstly think it's important to think that you're not just developing points from the source, you're actually using the source to develop a critical discussion. And here I think the marking criteria often uses the term insightful and sophisticated and critical. So what you're doing here in this sense is you're not just realizing that there's an obvious kind of theme or issue in the source that you could discuss. That's certainly part of it, but you're actually really engaging with what the source says about that particular issue critically. So for example, you might challenge the source and you might develop a discussion that goes beyond what the source is actually saying. So that might be by suggesting that the source makes a good point, however it doesn't go far enough, and you bring in a source from your own preparation to develop the point that you want to make about that issue using your own source. Or it might be that you bring in your own source and you challenge the actual claim of the source by saying this is actually not such a great way to think about history or its role in society, or whatever the issue is that you're being asked to focus on. So that's part of, I think, the idea of developing a critical discussion, is that you're constantly challenging and critiquing the source where it's appropriate and logical to do so within the frame of the question. So I think if you're really prepared for this particular part of the exam, what you're planning to do are really both of those things. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is if you're critically engaging with the source, you still certainly need to engage with it regularly by making regular references to it, but that's not all you're doing. You're actually developing something far more interesting, far more insightful, far more critical in the process of that discussion that you're having. And you can see the logical connections with the source and other things that we've talked about in the course, or other things that you've read about in your preparation. So a critical engagement with the source, I think, is absolutely important to beginning to develop something more than just an essay that includes some little patchy references to the source throughout. So how do you prepare for that? How do you prepare to actually do that in an exam, particularly when you don't know what the source is going to be about? It could be about anything. Could be written or developed from any source. So how do you actually prepare for that? Well, it's actually tricky, and you need to actually be quite active in the process of this, I think. Here are a couple of things that I'd suggest you at least have to do to develop some confidence for this. And the first is, I would suggest that you need to be constantly reading short texts about history and historiography and evaluating their strengths and weaknesses. Okay, so number one. And also in that process, I'd be thinking about, when you read those short texts, try to make some links with other historians. So part of your preparation might simply be, take an old exam, look at the source and the question, and think about how you'd actually go about responding to it. Find a newspaper article, look at some of the short articles that are in the booklets that I've given out in class, or some of the articles that we've even read in class, and try to think about how you evaluate what kinds of things are they commenting on, how do you evaluate those comments that they're making, and where do you see other sources that you could bring in to, say, challenge, extend, or critique the ideas that are in that particular text that you've read. So that's one way, is basically like the exercise. Okay, so you're exercising, read things that you might be a little bit unfamiliar with, and then try and critically engage with it. Perhaps even share those amongst yourselves. So you might find a source, dump it on your Facebook group or your Edmodo group or whatever it is, and other people can have a look at it and share in that activity. And I'm sure your teacher probably would have some things that you could add to this as well. Obviously, it makes a lot of sense also to complete past exam questions, particularly those that you may not be ready to or have actually read in class. Okay, so try and find some exams that you haven't done. This could be asking friends who do this course at another school. Just say, can I have your half-yearly exam, or do you have a copy of your half-yearly exam or something? And don't look at it until you actually sit down to actually write about it. Okay, so if you set aside, say, an hour and 5 minutes, you've got 5 minutes reading time, have a quick look at the source and do some planning, and then write an essay. Or you might even just set yourself 10 minutes, 5 minutes to read the source, 5 minutes to plan, and then perhaps even take it to your teacher and ask for some feedback on that. Another thing that I think is important to do is go back to an old exam question that you've done already, and have a look at how you actually approach the source in that, and see if there's ways that you could actually make it more sophisticated and more critical. And this is part of developing your own sense of your ability here, about where you could actually improve in this particular part of the exam. So having a look at your old responses with the old exam, critiquing it yourself, taking into the feedback that you've been given from your teacher, and trying to develop perhaps a new response to the question that's actually better and more sophisticated than the one that you came up with. So that's just a quick rundown. One strategy for beginning to improve and make more sophisticated your responses to question 1 in history extension.